Ready? In 3, 2...
Welcome to the 37th Intrazone, a show about the SharePoint Intelligent Intranet. I'm here with my son, Mark, and his Intrazone co-host, Chris McNulty.
Well, thank you very much, Mary. On today's episode, we'll be talking about one of our most asked about topics, government cloud and the GCC. But before we get into that, Mary Kashman, it's an honor to have you here.
Thank you.
You're Mark's mom.
I am.
I am going to legitimately make every one of our listeners jealous. Mary, you came in today with a bunch of home-baked coffee cake. So it warms my heart. Thank you so much for bringing it in. It's delicious. In another 4 or 5 weeks, if any is left, just write to the Intrazone and we'll be happy to mail you a piece. Thank you. So one thing that I know our Intrazone listeners are dying to take advantage of, since we have the planet's foremost expert on Mark Kashman here with us in the studio today, what is one thing that they wouldn't know about Mark that you would like to share with the audience?
First, a very special thing about Mark is he has been a gift to me for 48 years. But the thing that I think that has to do with all of this is even when he was a little boy, at night when I would go to be sure he was asleep in bed, he was never in bed. He was always in the study, working on the computer, sometimes 3 a.m. And I would have to say to him, Mark, it's time to go to bed. So he's always been, this has been his gig from day one.
You know, that's actually not a surprise. I will say that you should know that, I've known Mark for years, even prior to my joining Microsoft. And he is the most energetic and creative person that we have on the team. Like thinking back about all of the videos that he's made to help introduce major product launches or things like the Intrazone or his children's book authoring career. See, I worked that in. It's just really great to be able to work with Mark. And now having you in the studio, I can understand a little of where that creativity comes from. Thank you very much for taking us into the show.
Thank you.
Mark, from your upbringing to fresh baked goods to the government cloud.
I think it's a perfect segue. You can imagine me as a youngster late at night, pushing the boundaries of learning and just wanting to mostly play games that you can download. Maybe they took an hour to download and maybe they were 8-bit screens, but whatever. Going right to the government, I think that's exactly the level of which the government acts at, 8-bit government, right?
Yeah, it's funny. What kind of computer was it?
Our first one was a Commodore 64.
I had a Commodore 64.
It did.
Did you ever get Games Magazine?
I didn't go. I've honestly, I'll admit, I've never really been a true gamer.
Games Magazine in the back would publish machine code for Commodore 64 games.
Oh, very nice.
Which would be 4 pages of numbers. And you had to type everyone in flawlessly and then hit compile. And you either got a game or an error. And none of us were good typists.
I was going to say, what was your error and trial?
50-50.
That's not so bad. So you're playing half the time and banging your head against the wall half the other time.
Right.
Moving into government, and certainly joking about the 8-bit, government has its own complexities. And certainly what we offer to the government is a very rich offering. And we wanted to make sure that of all the requests that we were getting to learn more about the different government offerings and certainly what's behind that, not just the features, but how it's delivered to them, we wanted to add clarity to that. So we did what we hope you think we would do. We talked to some experts who have worked with a lot of government agencies and have compiled some specific notes here to share information about what we do for our government agencies. We sat down with Richard Toland, who's an enterprise and cloud architect with Perpetual Reality. We had Adam Levithan, who is a digital project manager at Withum. And we had John Peluso, who is the CTO for the public sector at AvePoint. And they all are experts in this space. And we basically dragged out of their brains all of which they could share about their government agency customers and what specifically they are doing with the cloud, how they got the cloud, things they do and don't like about the cloud.
So I think it's really important to also ground this in terms of, for our whole audience, whether you're in a government cloud or not, understanding what our offerings are there. Because the government clouds, and there's many more than three, but within the U.S., we basically have three. We have GCC, the government cloud community, which is mostly intended for certified civilian agency usage for the federal government, state, and local governments as well. Then we have GCC High for more restricted data, things that might be subject to import restrictions. And there's also a Department of Defense cloud. All of these are run somewhat at arm's length from us, higher levels of scrutiny, higher levels of security. I think what's important, and that's important to know as we're going into this following discussion with our experts, but also whether you're in the United States or not, whether you're in a government agency or not, you should understand that the U.S. government is by far the single largest entity that consumes data in the cloud. So that kind of scalability investment that we make in the service there is something that benefits everyone. And also understanding, is my data safe enough? Well, if it is safe enough for military defense use or highly private data from some of the other federal agencies or other institutions around the world, you can rest assured. And we have similar capabilities in other places around the world, Australia and Germany and China. So government cloud is not unique to the United States. What's interesting is if you look, for instance, at the government cloud that we operate in Germany, for reasons of national sovereignty and operation, the way that basically runs is we give the code, the guidance, the structures, the releases to a subcontractor who runs that German data facility on our behalf. It's staffed by German citizens, and it's run under the unique strictures of that data center. They go through extra compliance certification. What does that mean? It takes an extra 3 to 6 months on average for new features and the commercial tendency to show up in the government clouds. So there's a pro and a con. Yes, it is even more regulated and protected. It also lags commercial availability. So in almost all cases, our customers, we think, are in the right cloud for where they need to be.
And by the end of this episode, you'll be able to walk away knowing what those features are, or at least what they are today. But we hope the big focus that you'll hear at the roundtable is what are these government agencies doing? Not exposing any secrets, but putting reality into how do they use Office 365. And if you're another government agency listening to this episode or you want to pass along the information, you'll see that even if there isn't a feature here or there yet in that particular cloud, it's not limiting at all in terms of how people can leverage the cloud and all that Microsoft offers through the different workloads and, of course, where you store your data, have your conversations, do your email calendar across the board. You'll see it's a very rich set of scenarios that our government agencies are doing using that technology. Before we dive into hearing from the roundtable,
Yes.
We have a very exciting announcement.
Exciting.
We want to put at the head of the podcast because it's an announcement of a new podcast.
What?
But
A podcast inside a podcast.
this is Meta Podcast. This is, as OneDrive is built on SharePoint, so too is a new OneDrive podcast built on the Intrazone.
Oh.
Yet, one thing's very different. It is not hosted by Chris or I, but we are very closely related to it, and we want to announce the new OneDrive podcast called Sync Up. Sync Up is co-hosted with Ankita Kurdi, who is a product manager focused on OneDrive, and Jason Moore, who is on the engineering side. He's a partner GPM, so he looks after a lot of the design and the development of OneDrive. So it is, as you would imagine, a show all about OneDrive. We call it the Intelligent Files app for Microsoft 365, and Ankita and Jason are going to take you through behind the scenes each month, shedding light on how OneDrive connects people to all their files. In Microsoft 365, they'll chat with people internal and external to Microsoft all about OneDrive, around topics of discussion, tips and best practices, all the things that OneDrive can do for you in all the experiences, sharing, web, mobile, you name it. But the fun thing is on the day that this particular episode launches is when their first episode launches. So we just want to draw attention, new OneDrive podcast called Sync Up. Go to aka.ms/syncup, SYNCUP.
So this is a spinoff.
It is going to be a wonderful spinoff, and I can't wait for people to hear that podcast.
Well, that's just exciting news. Great.
All right, on to the roundtable discussion with Adam, Richard, and John.
Today, We're sitting down at SharePoint Fest with our government roundtable. We're hosting a discussion about all the implications for the government clouds today, where they're headed in the future, and what this means for you, whether you're a practitioner or consumer of government cloud services. Gentlemen, thank you for sitting down with us.
So we've gathered a bunch of people together to talk about government. And these are folks that are talking to government customers. They're working with them day to day. They know what it is they want. And they know certainly what Microsoft has to offer. And they know how to blend the two, obviously, to come out with, hopefully, happy government customers. We'll start with Richard Toland. Richard Toland, you're with Perpetual Reality. And if I have it right, you're a principal architect, which means you get a lot of questions.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, I do a lot of groundwork, too. I don't know. We're in a lot of sectors. We do public sector, government sector, and the architecture piece just spans all kinds of nuances from the small to the big. We've been party to 5 GCC implementations, a few FedRAMP approved, and 2 GCC High, and largely, as Microsoft partner, right? Like we all kind of get the invite. You get in, you get to scope it all out, and then it comes down to licensing questions. It comes down to capabilities. What do you have on-prem today? How do you want to make the synonymous equivalent to that happen tomorrow on GCC? And how do we bridge any gaps in between? And how do we get there for GCC?
Okay. Well, let's just go around the table to make sure we kind of get all the voices that you're going to hear. To Richard's audible right is Adam Levithan, and Adam is with Withum, your product manager.
Yep.
And you raised your hand for the call to talk to government agencies today with the Intrazone podcast. Give us a little bit about who you are and what's your background with government agencies.
So what you're saying is, why would someone do that? Well, the joke goes, I live in Washington, D.C.
There you go.
Do I need to say anything more? My SharePoint history has paralleled the work in the government. So when I got into SharePoint in 2006, I was working for a contractor serving the National Institutes of Health. I can name them, so it's fine. Mm-hmm. And I've worked either in commercial and supporting government ever since. Notice, oh wait, you know how many years that is now. Man, I was trying to avoid that aging thing. But at Withum, we are an advisory tax and audit firm, and we actually specialize in working with other professional services organizations. So it's a fun experience for professional services organizations that are voluntarily going to GCC and GCC High in the local DC area, and we help them make that transition, and then directly with other customers. And then also a little thing in my pocket, I will use not an acronym. Oh, yeah, it is an acronym, too. I was, for over a year, at an organization working on NIST 800-171. So, not secret, but fulfilling compliance requirements. So I have the power.
You have the power, but it also sounds like you have some mind share in that same area where you've got some consultants who can consult other consultants before they really open the door to how are we going to do this?
Exactly.
So going around the table now to my audible left is John Peluso from AvePoint. You are CTO of the public sector. Tell us a little about who is John and why government in what you do at AvePoint.
Yep. So AvePoint is a global ISV. We made our bones in the SharePoint days and have evolved with Microsoft into the Office 365 world. I spent many years in the commercial sector, mostly in regulated industries, talking to them about how they could make that move to the cloud. So clearly governance is a major concern there. And then made the move over to public sector a couple of years ago when they were beginning that same ramp. So I get to talk to plenty of customers about what their fears are, what their blockers are. It's a combination of trying to update their thinking and perception, but also taking very real concerns back to both the Microsoft team as well as our own development team and coming up with ways of satisfying the unique needs of that particular market.
So hopefully you see as we've gathered this roundtable of powerful minds across business and technology, but really serving a lot of the same customers, those government customers. But I know there's a couple of acronyms that we've been saying or who we've been sharing, and I just want to be really clear, and I'm going to put it to you to define the acronyms because you probably know them even better than I do. But GCC, Adam, when somebody says I'm investing in GCC or I want to go GCC, what does that mean?
So it's the Government Community Cloud. And actually, just like most Microsoft acronyms, it's changed of what it actually means over the years. Now, I think the simplest form, and I'll leave the technical answers to others, is that it is a separate environment than the commercially available. Now, what's different now is commercial entities can be in the Government Community Cloud. And then also now the Government Community Cloud, GCC, has many different levels that match the security levels of the government. We probably won't mention them directly, the three-letter acronyms that are, up and down the rivers in Washington, D.C., but they have, a higher level of GCC that is, again, even a separate environment from the separate environment, but for security boundaries and compliance reasons. So it means multiple different things, but basically different boundaries, different requirements, and as I know, we will talk about different features that are available in them.
That's correct. I think a lot of it's this certification of what type of either compliance measures are we meeting that are specific to what they're buying into, and then within that there's different levels, which may lead to a feature may or may not be available to them for that specific reason. Like there's the easy one. I've got a Twitter web part in SharePoint, not me, but you all can use it. But if you're limited to not being able to call the internet from your intranet, then that web part wouldn't be available to you, and you would have bought into that already. But sometimes it's a little bit more nuanced, and some features they do want, and it's a matter of getting it to them. We'll get to that. So let's bleed into talking about what are these customers doing. Customers specifically who are using GCC, FedRAMP, high-low, whatever. And John, we'll start with you. Whether it's an individual customer, you don't have to name them, but describe what it is that they're doing and how they came to you all to help get there.
So one of the cool things about my role is I get to go in and talk to folks about who are just in their early stages of figuring things out, planning. Sometimes they're well educated. Sometimes that's an opportunity to help educate them. And so I get to go in and have these really cool conversations, but then I don't have to do any of the actual work. So what that means is I get to talk to many, many different customers and get a broad scope. So I guess what I'll try to give you is what I see sort of across the landscape. And we, the customers that we deal with are spread across state and local, education, state healthcare. That's one bucket for us, and then federal included in there. Federal agencies, Department of Defense, and the intelligence community. So what we're seeing in the state and local market is first off a much faster adoption. They were ahead a little bit. I think it's just sometimes it's easier for them to move than for some of the federal agencies and DoD. And a lot of the use cases we see there echo that velocity. They're seeing the cloud and Office 365 specifically as a way to scale up their ability to modernize, to change, to get new features. Many of them were stuck on very old technology. And also, what it takes to provision a server in some of these organizations is absolutely mind-boggling.
I think you're going to need a PO for that.
Yeah. So I think velocity at the state and local level, certainly governance is still a concern, but that's a key driver. Obviously, cost occasionally is a driver as well, but we're not seeing that usually as the main driver. And in the federal space, believe it or not, as slow as federal government can move at times, it's the prospect of more open access. That's actually a big state and local one, too. They have field workers. They have folks that are outside the perimeter very often. And so a cloud-based solution is a much more appropriate way for them to work instead of fighting through those boundaries of the classic, hard wall around the perimeter. Federal is also significantly about this idea of especially now that Teams has launched in the GCC environments. That was a big driver for folks. They were waiting. They saw most of what was there as like for what they had today, but now that Teams is available, a lot of these more modern services are available. The launch of things like Power Apps and Flow and Planner into the GCC environments has been a real driver. So I think the ability to modernize and GCC finally getting some of that additional functionality has been a key driver for these guys.
So, Adam, as you're walking the DC beat and you're getting, questions in your ear, we'd like to try this, we'd like to do that. What are you actually seeing beyond those conversations, people really committing to and doing in the cloud, again, specific to government agencies?
Yeah, I think a quick note, like on a personal level too, I think a tipping point was the Compliance Center. I was absolutely astonished that Microsoft would publish. I come from a litigious family from New Jersey. We want to argue about everything. And you've put out everything you've done, which in some ways is exposure and risk. But it's been so helpful to even actually learn about compliance and learn about what the differences are. And that's how even commercial tenant can be compliant. And I guess there's a whole other session on what compliance means. No system, you are compliant, not the system. That's just, I'll leave it there. So that's on sort of like my learning curve and my experience over time. And that's only been, I guess, 2 years, not even. And then also my focus is much more narrow than John's. My product is an internet in the box solution. So most of our customers are coming from either not having something on premises that, yes, I've seen 2007 environments that they're like, okay, we're going to go to the cloud. And actually those are great because you have so much to gain. There are some great state, local, and federal organizations that are on 2016, and you're like, okay, well, yeah, the cloud's better, but it's not as clear cut as the ones who are on 2007. So same, one example I came with was a local utility. So I think my interpretation, not directly their words, is partially what they were used to. They were used to being on premises. So they're used to the security, they're used to the control. And so GCC has that by being that separate environment and the compliance levels that it meets compared to commercial. They didn't have to do that rework. So I think there is that true confidence.
What would you say that conversation was like when you compared it to maybe if you had that same customer, same conversation pre-cloud? You meet with the CSO, talking about security, what the requirements were. Can SharePoint version X, whatever, do it? Configure it in a certain way, tell me more what I need to add to it so it's as secure as I need it. Now that same conversation with cloud, same conversation or vastly different?
Yeah, vastly different. I hadn't actually thought about that, but I can't help myself but laugh when people are definitive that their on-premises environment is more secure than the cloud. And while John said there's uptick on the state and local, in truth, DoD was the first adopter of GCC. So it makes me smile that, yeah, that's nice that you think you can't go in the cloud, but I could tell you who I know is already in the cloud and using it to a huge amount. And we're not even talking about Azure right now. We're just talking about, well, I guess we always are talking about Azure if we're talking about Office 365. But so that always makes me smile. So yes, the conversation is easier and more difficult at the same time because there's still a disbelief. And I think the moniker of GCC and honestly, the bureaucratic paperwork that is the Compliance Center makes it easier. You joked about the PO in triplicate, signed, put in that cart. I think John's probably seen and you've seen that process. You print the paper out, you put it in a cart, and it goes from paper to paper. Yes, I did automate that with InfoPath, but that's a whole different story.
Is InfoPath supported in GCC?
I think am I not supposed to say that it is? Yeah, so that's a really great question. It is a different conversation. And actually almost all of our customers, we have some health customers that our RFPs are cloud only, even if they've come to us with 2019. And we're okay if they say, thanks, but we're going to stay on premises. And we say, okay, call us in 2 years when you're going to the cloud. So, that's commercial or GCC. So yeah, the conversation is different, easier, and then it's just that anxiety, but I think the paperwork helps.
Okay. So Richard, you get calls, or you just got a call. What are they calling about, and what have they actually done?
So our experience is largely focused in hybrid stack, or to the compliance sector that you're talking about, where everybody's been on-prem to meet their existing compliance. And I love the fact that you bring up, hey, compliance is only as good as you are, right? Like really what it boils down to is the platform and the technology can provide you the tools to implement, right? But really it's about process and the processes that you use those tools to meet the compliance, be it federal or international compliance in some of our clients. I also love utility, right? Like in the U.S. here, we have our core 5 utilities that are mandated by some international compliance issues, and their systems had to meet forever those kind of adherences. Our focus in a lot of places has been the opposite, where we come in with RFPs where we can understand how the hybrid meets a lot of those, it bridges a lot of those gaps where maybe you're not ready for full cloud. And a lot of that, I think, just comes down to change management. It's a lot easier, to your point, about jump from a 2007 to the cloud, because change management is like, this is so drastically different. We have a brand new set of tools for you. Here you go. Let's learn. Versus, hey, we're going from 2016 or 2019 to the cloud. Everybody goes, oh, it doesn't look the same. There's a lot of that. But kind of our sweet spot has been in historically on-prem to the cloud or on-prem to hybrid, and what does that hybrid construct look like? On-prem has changed as well, right? On-prem really has turned into on-net, and you could be IaaS in any cloud today and still meet hybrid compliance for whatever cloud provider you're looking at. Multi-cloud and cross-cloud compute is in most of our clients. Very few of them are on-prem data centers as their primary data center anymore. A lot of them have moved their primary data center into a cloud, and their alternate is an actual physical leased space in most of their cases. Very few of them have their own dedicated data center. But that's where we get the calls, right? Is in, hey, we'd love to jump into this. We have all of these federally mandated requirements that we have to adhere to. What platform can provide that for us while leveraging our current tools or our current processes? And in a lot of our calls or a lot of our discussions are around how do we bridge that gap to step from a purely on-prem into maybe a hybrid or into straight out GCC, and what does it look like?
So quick follow-up just on hybrid, how you're hearing it from your customers when they either you raise that as an option or they come to you and they say, this is what we'd like to do. Do they think of it as hybrid as a motion to move to the cloud, or establish hybrid because we know some things will never move to the cloud, but we want to take advantage of the cloud?
The biggest selling point in conversations around hybrid is in security and compliance. The Security and Compliance Center, as soon as it could see the analytics and metrics of an on-prem SharePoint platform, was a game changer, and everybody wants to go hybrid now. Search was another big one, but I think the shift with modern search interface kind of stifled for a bit. But really, Security and Compliance Center having the visibility to the on-prem components and the actual interaction of file interaction or even chats, right, in your news feeds is big. That's a big deal for a lot of clients.
So I made up an acronym because, again, I'm from DC, so I had to. So IAIA, which is Infrastructure as Information Architecture.
Are you in on that with Sue Hanley? Does she approve this?
I don't know. I guess I'll have to. I'll see if she approved it. It has been documented and been reused in many a presentation. But regulated industries, whether it's pharmaceutical or the GCC, I think to your answer, some of it might not ever move. But so we can describe to them it's okay that you can have split email. That there are some people who need to have their email on premises for whatever reason, and then the rest can be in the cloud. And then you can have multiple different solutions for cloud sharing, and you can have your intranet possibly, on premises because you're sharing, whether it's intellectual property or high risk content that you wouldn't want. You just want that extra comfort. Where again, yes, I personally believe that the cloud is just as secure, but I'm not going to argue more than 3 times with my clients. So we have the flexibility now to actually, you talk about hybrid. It could be, on-premises services in the cloud. It could be actual on-premises servers on premises, and then it could be a SaaS offering. So we're seeing a little bit that it is about just, also the CIOs convincing to move. They need to at least give something, give a carrot to say, oh, look, you were right. Here's what we're sticking on premises for the foreseeable future.
Fair enough. Well, I'd like to move the conversation to talk about change management, but I have, I think, a simple question that sort of rounds up. I heard you mentioning earlier different feature sets and what you're hearing. I know that you also work with non-government agencies, just to be frank of how broad your consultancies reach. If you were to take off the table this notion of a sovereign cloud, that they're just in the cloud, but obviously we know that they're purchasing a specific SKU from Microsoft that puts them in a specific way in the data center. If you take that out of the equation, do you see a huge difference in the scenarios and the use cases between government and enterprise? I'm seeing a lot of nods. So John, I saw you vigorously nodding your head. What do you see as the big differences from a scenario and use case between government and what we think of as enterprise, the other SKUs that we sell?
So I think I was vigorously nodding because it's an excellent question, and the way you framed it is awesome, and I don't agree with it. No, I think for the most part, we're seeing very similar use cases. Now, I want to be clear, this is mostly around collab, right? So we're talking strictly Office 365 here. I'm not talking data center stuff or Azure stuff. But when it comes to collab, I think we see 2 mentalities, and they're in both markets. There's the lift and shift mentality, which is I want to do exactly what I was doing on-prem. So this is the mindset of don't talk to me about Teams, don't talk to me about groups. I want to use SharePoint Online, and I want to use it exactly the same way. And to be fair, we do see that in both the commercial and in the public sector market. Certainly, I'm not seeing it any more frequently in the public sector market. As a matter of fact, a lot of those state and local agencies that I'm working with are very forward-looking, very forward-thinking. There are other issues there around adoption, user education, just thinking how do I manage that? I've never even thought about working this way before. But so I don't see that as being a major difference in the way that people are thinking about things. So the 2 mindsets, again, would be the lift and shift versus the transformation, I guess we would call it. Since we're in a Microsoft podcast, let's call it transformation.
Digital transformation. Digital transformation.
And it's teamwork.
That's right. That's
teamwork.
Right. Wasn't on-prem digital too? I mean, I'm just checking.
There were no ones and zeros on premises. It was all 2s.
So I do think that one of the major differences that we don't see a lot is the additional layers of bureaucracy. A large commercial organization, let's say a financial services organization, heavily regulated, very concerned about governance, but when they make a decision to do something, they can move very, very quickly, right? Or at least at some velocity. I've had government agencies, particularly in the federal space, where they kept asking me, what's the experience going to be for the user? How is it going to change for the user? And I really didn't understand. I said, this, you do training. This is what you do. There's a way through this. And only after some additional discussion did we find out that they have a unionized workforce. Right. And so there are things there that are, just realities that the commercial world oftentimes either doesn't have or doesn't have to the same degree. So their ability to move quickly sometimes has bureaucracy layers to do with it. There's also funding things. Right. So they're at the mercy of the funding that they have. And it's not, the decision to invest for the future is not really a way that they work. I think the last thing that we see is with a lot of the government customers, the value props are different. Right. When I go to a large commercial organization and I try to help them understand the value of doing this kind of transformation, it's about profit, it's about bottom line, stock prices, it's about all of those things that are their goals, and the goals of government are very, very different. and thank God. But, largely they're around things like providing better service and, having a better offering and working better and more efficiently internally, even if it requires different kinds of things than in commercial. Those are the biggest difference that I see.
I think the bureaucracy I would continue on, and actually, hopefully there are a lot of government staff and employees listen to this, so it's not the way you're getting all riled up about. I actually think it's the opposite, that there can be more bureaucracy in commercial entities than in federal or state or local, but it's just different. Actually, what you said, John, about funding mechanism and the motivation for the bureaucracy is different. And I think where there is some challenges is in a smaller state, local, federal organization, there is more separation of roles and responsibilities, where in a corporate organization, you get Bob, the unicorn, who's doing everything. So it's easier to describe to Bob that, yes, Exchange and SharePoint will move at the same time, and you're okay, where, you could be in a 2,500 person agency, and there are the 5 different people who are doing the 5 different services, as we call them now, but they're servers under their desks or in their environments. So it's habits that are also just a tiny bit different on the agency side. And then I think one of the differences I've seen from federal and state and local is federal predominantly are a part of a larger entity. Even when they have some ability to make choice and have technologies, there is a higher level. This is a gripe too, and I know it's probably being worked on, but National Institutes of Health that I mentioned before, really, they have one domain, but they're 27 different institutes with 27 different IT teams. Actually, it's double that because there's intramural and extramural. So I know that the team did actually fix the Active Directory environment for the tenant, but that was a custom build. It's not something that's available, easily to other agencies. So it's a different situation where individual groups want to achieve. There's only one global administrator. Now there's not. They've made change. But whoa, that's a huge difference where the utility organization that we worked with, they have control of everything. And they're in a group, but they're independent, So I think it's really, that's where some of the little differences are. And you get that. We worked with commercial insurance organizations that they're talking about, well, yeah, we're a company, but then that's our parent company, who's actually owned by that investment company. And you're like, what? Do they all have Office 365? Well, yeah, kind of, but we have our own tenant.
Maybe the word of the day is delegate. And to that, maybe we'll delegate to Richard to kind of round us off on this. Vast differences or a lot of commonality between government agencies and enterprise?
I think the feature ask is similar everywhere, right? Like everybody has Twitter or Facebook or some social media where the MVPs and the community leaders are all out espousing about, look at these cool features and ways that you can implement process and procedure, be it with business process automation and flow, or data input, data output, data analysis, right? Power Suite as a whole is a selling point for a lot of organizations in just feature sets. I think that ask is a common ask everywhere you go, where we've actually had clients that have had to turn down the cloud because the level of federal compliance that they've had to adhere to put them into the GCC High platform, where it was more restrictive and the Power Suite doesn't exist yet, right? So they've had to say, I can't do that yet. I have other on-prem business process automation or data analysis, data integration components that I can evaluate on-prem still. We'll get there, right? When the features show up, we'll head there. And then I've had other clients, other organizations that have embraced it and said, well, shucks, we'll find a way around it, for the meantime. But largely that feature ask is still the same. And it's been the same since 2007 on-prem, right? The features that were provided from the Office server suite since the dawn of, I would say, right around MOS, right? It really kind of came together in MOS. Those have evolved in a lot of organizations that we're talking about that are government potential clients, right? Be it for-profit or not-for-profit, a government agency, or someone that provides services to a government agency. A lot of times, those clients are forgotten about in that I'm in this gray area where I don't do that kind of business, but I provide a service to those that do. And if there's data exchange in my exchange box for theirs, then now I'm toast. I have the same federal mandates on top of me. Those are considerations where somewhere in the middle, the happy medium for feature sets is in the FedRAMP. And where we see the platform can provide a lot of those components and feature components to you, maybe not with the same level of connectors outside that cloud. But from business process automation, again, data ingress, data egress, and data analysis, those are that's the ooey gooey center of what everybody uses.
Is
right?
that double stuffed or triple stuffed?
Triple stuffed, for sure. And those features largely in the middle in that FedRAMP sweet spot. You have a lot of the tooling. You may have to build some custom connectors to get it, but hopefully you've got them well defined already in your on-prem platform process procedures, or you can rebuild and do the change management that it takes in order to step into that next tooling, next progression.
Well, you just said the key word, change management. So if we've kind of bridged gaps between compliance, data sovereignty, all the decisions people make about how they want to use the cloud, if they can, when they can, hybrid, not hybrid, there's change management. And the one that I wanted to talk about was to kind of step on the landmine of our own change management, because we get a common question, when is it coming to GCC? And we get it from our enterprise customers too, because we have ways of rolling out. So I thought I'd start with just 2 sentences describing how we commonly roll out to GCC. We have a couple of what we call rings of release, but it's basically who gets this feature. We've announced a big feature, and now it's going to start to roll out. We've got our targeted release customers, and that's anybody who signs up for it in the commercial space. And then it goes to full production. So that's a pretty wide body of customers. That commonly then after that we go full 100% worldwide commercial production is when we actually start to roll out a feature to GCC. And then there's the if, like we talked about, does it require a connection to the internet? If yes, it may not go to GCC, or hopefully they know that that's what they're buying into. My question to you is, what are you hearing from your customers when they start to invest in the Microsoft Cloud and hopefully get some understanding, maybe through you or through us, that there is a process that we go through to get features to them specifically? What are you hearing from your customers about the Microsoft Cloud change management release cycle? Adam, we'll start with you.
Sure. I won't be mean to you, Mark, because I want to be asked back eventually. So I won't ask this in a form of a question.
And any of this can be edited out at any time.
Whole people can be removed. But there's a misconception that the validation and the certification process is not at the beginning of the development. And because you describe the rings, they think, oh, well, Power Apps was never thought that it was going to go into GCC High. Now, by the way, GCC High didn't really exist when Power Apps was started, but I'm sure someone said we're going to need this for the government if we can. Mm-hmm. So that I'm not posing that as a question, but I think that's one of the biggest things is I think the messaging around it. I remember when there was clearly a government moniker in the roadmap. So, I think those things, the transparency of, hey, we've noted this. Maybe it's even, as you said, like this needs the internet. That means it's suspect for these levels of the environments. So I think it's that transparency that people just aren't comfortable with. And also, say it a positive way, they're excited about the features. And so they want them. It's not because they're like, ugh, not that again. Why are we getting that? It's, oh, I can use that now. So that's why it's wanted in the environments. I think it's not that different than the commercial side, but specifically for government, getting back to a government roadmap and maybe a little more marketing, honestly, about how the security is built in from the beginning that I know and I have insight into, but it'd be great to give people that confidence.
Richard, anything same, different? Would you ditto it or would you add to it?
I would add to that. I think it's about cadence, right? And when, feature release is one thing. When we're actually talking about, change management, that's all communication, transparency. Those are, I think they go hand in hand, obviously. Things that we hear from our customers are, there's a lot in the cadence space, right? Like our public sector customers are really asking for a go faster. I want more features. Like bring it on, right? In the private sector, people are going, whoa, slow it down. Like you're changing too fast. So again, the sweet spot, that ooey gooey center is that FedRAMP approved because, historically, when you look at your cadence, the release cycle to FedRAMP, historically, if you look at from the life cycle, I'll just say like the window for GCC High, we've seen feature releases within, like in the GCC High, anywhere from 12 to 18 months. And that follows up from the clock when it's released to the public enterprise cloud. It's like 12 to 18 months to get to GCC High, and maybe about 6 months to hit that sweet spot in the FedRAMP for a lot of the features. And that's quickly diminishing, right? The infrastructure is provided to, like I said, in all of the clouds, the same. And the features that as they're published or released, it's getting faster that we're seeing in the GCC space. Where from change management, now it comes into how do we openly communicate that and train on those feature sets. The ask that we see from communication or from change management in the client space, a lot of times is really surrounding, explain to me what this feature is if I didn't have it, or explain to me how it's changing if I've had it and it's going to change, either from a licensing perspective or from a tooling perspective. And a lot of that is I think, lost in the shuffle. The speed, the cadence, especially, when we're talking about enterprise or the commercial cloud, I think a lot of that, the speed of it diminishes in the message. Versus when you slow it down a little bit, as we see in the FedRAMP space, that's really kind of like the messaging is out there. It's evolved to the point where the tooling is sufficient and the documentation is in place where people can really glom onto how to use it, how to implement it, and how to distribute it appropriately. And that's right around that 6-month window. Hey,
this is Chris.
Surprise guest.
Surprise guest. It's reassuring to hear you say that, but I would also observe, I think from Microsoft's perspective, we totally appreciate the value that our partners are adding in this space, but I think we still have a lot of ground to go. It's reassuring to hear that there is some perception that we're getting things out to GCC and GCC High faster. I think we still have a long way to go there. And it's good to hear that there's better comms than before, but again, I think we recognize that what we get to hear, the survivorship bias, the stories we get is we don't get complaints from our government cloud customers saying, you're releasing stuff too fast and you're giving us too much information. We hear the opposite, and so I think some of the frustrations are legitimate.
So I want to pivot the question to John and, phrase it however you'd like. Happy customers or upset customers in this space?
I think the answer is, are you happy or upset? Are you happy to know that ice cream exists, but you can't have it right now? That's the scenario.
Caramel or not caramel?
Salted.
The messaging, right? That really the messaging machine that starts at announcement of preview. Look at this cool stuff that's coming, right? And then, okay, now it's really coming. And then it comes out. And then it rolls out. And then it's 3, 6, 8, 10, 12 months before they get it. I think what I'm hearing from my government customers is, listen, these are guys that skipped Office releases, right? So because they don't have the feature the month it comes out isn't the big deal. What's happening is essentially exactly victims of our own success here. The user community is sold. I want that. They're pounding on their IT department. And then the user community, they don't see it as a failure of Microsoft. They see it as a failure of their IT department. How come you're not providing me this capability that I know exists? So there's a organizational dynamic, I think, which is another layer to this problem. And frankly, I don't think the messaging is there yet. And maybe that's because we don't know what it is yet, right? Great new feature, site group level labels that protect all of the data within with the single application of a label. Fantastic. I have several government contractors and customers for whom that would be extraordinary. I don't have a clue in the world when that's coming. So as they're shaping their Office 365 governance strategy, do you plan on that? Do you not plan on that? I mean, what do you do there? So I think that's the place that folks are in. And, the very thing we need is the thing that probably you can't give us, which is some clarity or estimation. But even just more transparency about the process publicly, I think would be good, so that we could point back and say, these are the hoops that we have to go through. Obviously, we're talking about government stuff, so you'll never be able to open that that conversation up fully. But I think having more publicly available information, we have a better government roadmap today than we had before, meaning we have a better way to display the roadmap than we did before, but there's not much on there. So I think that's where we get to a problem. It's a content issue, not a process issue.
I would totally echo that. I think from the perspective of transparency and communication in the loops, right, in the cycles as we're doing releases, I think a clear distinction or separation of FedRAMP versus High 2 would add a lot of clarity and transparency, because it's confusing when you have like 500 bullet or footnotes of feature compliance or feature components that are in each SKU. That would definitely add, I think, a lot of transparency, like what's available on this platform versus these SKUs, and then what kind of timing. Just maybe not of product, right? But what kind of timing to expect new releases or new cadence?
And also, teach a man to fish as well, right? So does it mean that every new feature is subject to delay? Or does it mean you've delivered this, there's an enhancement that's going to commercial, do I or don't I get it? There's got to be some idea of that, right? So an example might be, private channels. It's all the rage right now. Everybody's talking about it. Is that coming to GCC? I don't know. If so, when? Nobody knows, right? So this is the kind of level of just teach me how to think, right? Is it, if it's an enhancement to a feature that already exists, generally speaking, should I expect it or should I not expect it? Versus this is a net new feature, net new architecture, probably going to take some time.
And that goes back to what is the obstacle that you're overcoming? Right now, people think it's you're securing that technology. And that's not the case in all of the technology. Some of it might be that it uses the specific API. We do have to change the API. We knew that, but we had to get it right first, and then we'll change it. Fine. But you can say something like, what is the obstacle? And that's also the problem, because the assumptions are you don't care about the government client. You commercial first.
Yeah, and I will tell you from the Microsoft perspective, it is the exact opposite. Of course we care. That is why we opened up the offerings and sell heavily to and work with you all to get it out there. I think we've seen some success when we list things on the public roadmap that is specific feature or large application like Microsoft Teams for government. That is a roadmap item. It's very distinct on what it brings, and it really is all of Teams. There may be a couple little nuances. I'm not super fluent on all of it. But to your point, John, now that Teams is available to government, or when it is, there is a lot of aspects that brings. That's a plumbing through to documents stored in a SharePoint library. That's plumbing through to a shared calendar, which is an exchange online, which means that sort of opens up the doors for a lot of new features, maybe through the UI and the window of Teams. But to your point around existing features or something that's maybe a little bit lesser than something as big as Microsoft Teams or Power Apps, how do we list that? We usually try to list the SKUs that's going to be available for, but we don't put out the timing of each. And I think that's where what we're hearing, Chris and I obviously hear on behalf of not just this podcast, but for Microsoft, is to hopefully pass along that information, do better with our workloads, but at the same time, do better all throughout Microsoft.
I would love to get the panel's thoughts on JEDI, Joint Electronic Defense Initiative. For those of you who are not aware, this is not a SharePoint feature. This is not even a Microsoft feature. This is a United States Department of Defense initiative to create this mega all-encompassing cloud contract that they're putting out for competing offers that include Microsoft, that include many of the largest competitors in this space, Amazon, Google, etc.
He did name them.
Well, I think most of
have to
our
cut
audience
all of this.
is familiar with who
major
else
players,
does this.
These are not the robots you're looking for.
I was wondering if in each of your practices, are you already seeing the existence of that initiative as validating the concept of cloud to organizations which historically have been resistant, or do we think it's too early to tell?
So besides liking the name of Jedi for obvious reasons, yes, you can find me driving around in my Subaru with Jedi stickers on the side of the car. I think right now in the non-technical realm, no, it actually hasn't, because right now it's still a bidding war. It's not necessarily like, oh, this is real. I mentioned before, like, we here know that the DoD was actually one of the biggest adopters first of the cloud. So this is an extension for the Department of Defense. So it's the civilian agencies that still actually, look at it as a difference. And you can tweet me if I'm wrong and I've offended anyone on the listening to the podcast. But so I don't think that it has pushed out yet. I think when it's actually awarded, and in truth, it doesn't matter who it's awarded to. Obviously, there'll be benefits to one or the other, but no, it doesn't. To your point, as soon as it's adopted, people are going to say, wait, what are the amount of zeros that were behind that contract, and what is actually going to be hosted and trusted on that? That is going to be just immense.
So, Richard, with the Millennium Falcon parked just behind you, and I can see all the Jawas wandering around, and Han Solo, I'm not sure what he's doing. What is your take on the Jedi?
I think there's cost and consequence to every evaluation of every service, right? What we're finding more prevalently is that it's never going to be one provider at every level and every customer that we have. We were talking earlier about hybrid servicing just in the Microsoft stack. And so many of those clients who have been pursuing hybrid capabilities with Microsoft stack are pursuing hybrid capabilities in other platforms too. I think it makes a lot of sense for cross-cloud or intra-cloud communication and service offerings. And there's some power to Jedi, right? And it hasn't been decided yet, but it wouldn't surprise me at all to see multi-cloud offerings, multi-cloud provider solutions that come to fruition there.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and I think it's also really relevant that one of the classic conundrums that commercial customers face, which is, do I go with best platform, a best of breed approach? Of course, the single largest cloud contract in the history of Earth is going to be subject to the same trade-offs of, do I go for ease of integration and perhaps not the pinnacle of features, or do I swap for a more difficult integration cost around disparate best features? Yeah,
so even in the commercial space, right, we see an organization that I've recently been working with, it's 150,000, almost 170,000 employee base that they're pursuing the potential of exploring other service offerings from other cloud providers. And the question comes down to, how do they fracture which pieces can go to those other cloud providers with the least impact to their security and in their user offerings, right? It all boils down to feature offerings to the business and to conduct their business. It's no different for government. It's how do we conduct our business in the most secure fashion and fastest mean time to solution.
So, John, do you take a seat at the Jedi Council? Yes or no?
Yes, I do. It could be that I've spent too much time in government. The skeptical side of me, which is mostly the side that speaks on this subject, wonders how much this is really about technology, right? This is a procurement thing. This is a ease of procurement because we have this blanket agreement that this is what we're going to use. That lets us do things much more centrally, creates velocity for everything that needs to happen from then forward. So one of the biggest blockers in my business with the government is procurement, right? It's not the little sale, it's the big sale. How do I get it through for purchase? So I think on one level, there's a major value in the whole Jedi topic, which is about that, just getting that from a vendor perspective. How do I get that, right? How do I get to be the chosen one? To me, it's not about validation of a cloud technology versus not. I think it's a given because you're on either side of me, that I think it's pretty astounding and a great accomplishment and shows the level of initiative, Mark, which is what you were saying before, and dedication to this market that Microsoft is the short list in this initiative. If you look back 3 years, you would not think that would have been the case, just given folks that were earlier to market with a larger reputation at that point in time in the government market. So I think it's a great success to be at this state. And I think that the biggest risk here is, again, skeptically, I don't even know if it's best of breed and best of individual solution that's going to win this. If it happens, I think, there's an almost religious resistance to saying, especially in the government, I'm going to put all my eggs in one basket.
It reminds me a little bit of what goes on when the IOC, the International Olympic Commission, is choosing cities. The sweet spot for any city is to be on the short list, because then you can make the key infrastructure improvements that you need. But the final mile or kilometer of, hey, we have to go build a 125,000 person diving stadium. Those may not be worth your while as a city, but just getting your infrastructure ready so you can contend.
No, absolutely.
Everyone is a rising tide.
It forces you to be better at those things. And this goes back to even the feature stuff, even the feature rollout, right? Tremendous empathy as a software company, right? We all know there are skeletons in closets, and we do things sometimes in our software because at the time it seems like the path of least resistance with no real risk, even though, later when you re-examine that, you may say, why did we do it that way, right? Now I have to unwind that and refactor the way we're doing things. So whoever wins this is now going to be beholden to lots of requests and lots of very unique requirements. So as you say, there's risk and reward of being the ultimate winner here. So we'll see what happens. I think there's so many dynamics at play that it's going to be very, very interesting.
Yeah, obviously, Mark and I both like working at Microsoft, so we're not going to comment on the specifics, but it's definitely a really great, Monday morning quarterback sort of thing to watch.
Yep.
So this will be a pretty quick roundtable discussion, and then we'll close it down. Quick tip that you share with your customers. Day one, at any point in time, what do you tell them that you think is the first and best thing to share with them to get things moving forward?
Yeah, especially with focus to GCC high potential, I would say a day like minus 150, start evaluating what your federal requirements are and international requirements if you do any kind of international business. Pay special attention to financial markers and any kind of email exchange or transactions that you're doing through your exchange environment. And then aside from that, when it really comes down to feature comparison, apples to apples, there's a cost increase. So be cognizant that there is a difference in cost for the GovCloud feature sets and high GCC high specifically. So I think that would be my tip: is focus on what features you need and then how much they're going to cost.
John, a tip that you just can't help but share, knowing that it's just going to make your life easier once you share the tip?
Listen, I'll do anything to try to make my life easier. The first thing that I would say is that perhaps it's because of they haven't been in the space as long, but I'm finding that my government customers often are lagging a little bit in education on all the aspects, right? Now, that's great for me and for those like us who can go in there and help create that clarity and very easily become a strategic advisor. But there are a tremendous amount of resources available to understand all the ins and outs that affect your business about the cloud. Everything from stuff on the user side to stuff on the admin side. Tremendous amount of resources that are out there, and I think it's just sort of getting plugged in to that stuff. So no different than what's happening in commercial, but I think just because they've been looking at it longer, commercial folks are generally a little bit more informed about that. So I think if you have that, you can challenge your vendors, you can challenge your consultants, you can challenge, and because not everybody's going to make it, right? Not everybody's going to make this transformation with you, and you can't have folks sitting in the room asking how they're going to control CPU throttling in Office 365, because it's just, that's not the your cheese is moved, dude, right? And then the other thing that I see over and over, more so in government than I do in commercial, is this concept of you need to go back and re-examine your administrative roles and divisions and silos. Because it was perfectly fine that you had an Exchange administrator on-prem and you had a SharePoint administrator on-prem, and there's still obviously roles that make sense there. But I've gone in and talked to more than one customer who said, I'm a SharePoint person. I have to now manage these team sites that are attached to SharePoint, backed by backing a Microsoft team, but I have no control or say over how the team is managed. Well, okay, but that doesn't work, right? It's a single. It's got to be thinking about this single object. So there needs to be at least some discussion, because while those roles may still exist, the responsibilities of who owns what. If I'm a SharePoint person, I no longer am responsible for the ultimate life cycle. Do I need this site? Do I get rid of it? Should I lock it down? Right? I can't do that in a vacuum, because I have to think about the other side of it. And so you can't have this mindset that I do SharePoint, I only do SharePoint. I think that's another big tip that I see. And that conversation has to start early, because it's bad when it happens at implementation time.
So my day one type tip, actually it probably comes to mind, is change management. We talked about feature rollout, and there are some things that come no matter what. And I'm not a proponent of blocking all the time, but save some features. People want to have, we could call it the waterfall if we're going, putting my product management hat on and development, that they want everything to happen at the same time. No, don't do that to yourself. Especially with the intranets that we focus on, save some features and roll them out monthly, because one of the human things with change management is the change itself. What a great communication strategy to actually have new and exciting features to continually provide. And that there's so much, especially if you've just moved to email first, which is typical. I am a proponent of OneDrive as the second, way to go. And one of the reasons is you've just trained them how to use SharePoint and Teams without telling them that you've trained them to use SharePoint and Teams in OneDrive. And it's just a use case that makes sense. So, and those are services, that's big, but even, do just a calendar. Now it's a rolled up calendar. That you can do these little things that in the back end aren't that big of a deal, but it's what the end user was asking for. So just hold back on the features and really, Richard Hardbridge quoting you, launch is not the goal. That it is a continuous improvement beyond the rings. And if you hold features in reserve, then actually the Microsoft cadence means less, because the eye is on what they're getting and not on all of what's in the future.
Thank you all for all of your tips, and certainly throughout this episode, thank you for all of your mind share of what you're seeing out there, what you're hearing, and for being stewards, for certainly bringing some of that information to Chris and I and to now our audience to share both internally and externally, to have great conversations that will follow. So thank you, Richard, for joining us. Thanks for everything you had to share.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, John, for your time and sharing everything today.
No, it's been a pleasure to be part of the conversation.
And thank you, Adam.
Thanks for having me.
Up next, one of your favorite segments, FAQ, Fabulously Answered Questions. These are things that we have heard about in the community at large from our colleagues, questions that we know are common that we want to be able to share and answer with for you.
So my challenge to you is you answer yours fabulously. I will answer mine fantastically. What is your FAQ this week, Chris?
So one question I've heard about a lot in the last 2 to 4 weeks is looking at the various Microsoft services. And if you look in particular at things that come out of the Power Platform, when Power Platform announces this new capability is now available in GCC, why don't I see it inside of Office 365, SharePoint, OneDrive, etc.? And it's a great question. As with many other experiences throughout the suite, we build Office 365 capabilities on top of a subset of Azure services. And so the first step at being able to deliver that functionality to you is bringing that base flow capability or Power Apps capability into GCC. But that's not the end of the story. For us to be able to roll something out, we also need to roll out a user experience. So it has to come after what's being shipped, but hopefully not too far behind. So the best way to understand what's coming to your environment is to take a look at the Microsoft 365 roadmap. We have a link in the show notes so you can find out where this is. But that's the one stop to go in and figure out what is coming into my government cloud and when can I expect it. Mark, I hope I answered that fabulously.
That was fabulous. Now I'm going to try to be fantastic. So the question I get in this space is, how does this compare with the enterprise SKUs? So as people are looking at what is offered in the commercial space for enterprise, and we have all the different SKUs, E1, E3, E5. When they go and look at the government plans, it's essentially that. It's G1, G3, G5. But before that, there's an eligibility requirement that must be met. You can't, not just anybody can go into the Gov Cloud, as you can imagine.
Not just anybody.
Not just anybody. You can, Chris, of course. But there are certain eligibility rules and requirements that we have listed, and also what's included, the same as you go in Enterprise E1, E3, E5. There's a really nice page, I'll put a link in the show notes, that shows you what is in G1, G3, G5. And of course, further explanation if you want to go into the great details. And we always hear, certainly help me understand when a new feature launches, is that going to be included or not? And you heard what we talked about in the roundtable. And even off of that, I've started to list in some of our roadmap blogs, and I know for you as well, that we'll start listing whether it is or isn't yet in GCC. We'll add that as a note in a particular feature. The other thing that's just a helpful resource to not only understand is one of these government plans appropriate, but to also just review how are other government agencies leveraging Microsoft technology. You heard a lot of references today, but we have a really nice page that includes what people are doing with the Microsoft Cloud specific to these different government agencies. And there's a couple of nice case studies, a lot of different depth around what people are doing with the Office 365, AI, IoT. It's a really nice breadth page that goes into, before I invest, what are other people doing as proof points to make that decision. So we'll put all that in the show notes, and always appreciate these great questions.
So Mark, you did that not just fantastically, but famously as well.
Oh, all these Fs. It's amazing.
Well, thanks for taking us through that. And now let's turn our attention to upcoming events. If you are going to a conference, or if there is a conference coming to your city and you can't go and attend, try to see if they have a user group session going on. Because we do have an Office 365 user community here in the Puget Sound area, and they get a certain level of attendance and participation, and it's a really solid event. But when they go to an event like SharePoint Fest and you get a large national or international constituency, they also get to see how the audience suggests other answers as the panel is discussing things. So it's just a great resource both for networking as well as problem solving.
Yeah, and always very tied to the local community and not just the people, but the businesses around there. So if you have a very specific question or a very specific need, it usually can be solved in an evening. And as a segue, the user groups are always free. What's another free type event that we always talk about?
Watching television. I think of the other kind, if I'm following you, they're SharePoint Saturdays.
Yes.
SharePoint Saturdays are an exceptional opportunity for users and IT alike to learn from and engage with their local community. And, as Mark just mentioned, they're available for the low price of
$0 free.
Coming up are a number of events, including...
So on September 14th, there are 2 SharePoint Saturdays, one in Barcelona, Spain. You can follow all the action at SPS Barcelona. Or if you're closer to Sweden, in Stockholm, there's a nice SharePoint Saturday event, and you can follow SPS STHLM. That's a fun one. We'll definitely put it in the show notes so you can follow that action. And on September 21st...
2 more SharePoint Saturdays, Adelaide in South Australia, as well as Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And as always, you can learn more through our show notes or just by visiting spsevents.org to find these and another SharePoint Saturday coming to a city hopefully close to you soon.
Yes. So next up, I'll let you take this one because I think you know a little bit more about it. I'll give it a little intro. It's the Gartner Digital Workplace Summit in London, September 12th through the 13th.
Yes, if you're listening to us on broadcast day later this week, Microsoft is sending a notable team over, including me somehow, to London to speak and present at the Gartner Digital Workplace Summit. Jared Spataro, Microsoft's corporate vice president, will be presenting a keynote session about the broad view of everything that we're doing across modern workplace left to right, including SharePoint, including Teams, including Power Platform. I'm delivering a theater session on how to integrate SharePoint and Power Apps into your Teams experiences. There'll be lots of sessions available at the booth. So if you are in the London area next week, please swing by and check it out.
Yeah, and I think the genesis of the show is more focused at strategy and vision. So it'll be probably a little less technical, but you can go as deep as you want if you go to Chris's session and ask him all the tough Teams questions.
I think I'm more the Phil Collins of the show, but appreciate your saying that.
Now I want to see how well your drumming goes.
So
our next one is Ignite 2019 in Orlando, Florida, again. And it will be November 4th through the 8th. About 25,000 people coming together across a ton of sessions, hands-on labs, lots of in-person events, both in the morning, noon, afternoon, late into the night. You can expect a lot of activity. And we know that it is sold out, but
there are plenty of opportunities to participate remotely through the Ignite website. We'll be streaming the keynote and making tons of session content available in real time. So please come and connect with us digitally if you're not there in person.
And as you know, we also have Ignite the Tour, which then takes a lot of that content and a lot of the subject matter experts around the globe to about 30 cities. And that will kick off pretty shortly after Ignite in Orlando. So expect in the late part of 2019 and early part of 2020, a lot of that same content will be very regionally focused and delivered across the world. There's a great website that shows you all the tour cities and even a breakdown of all the sessions that will be there.
You know, one of the tour cities that we're coming to on the Ignite Tour next year is Prague. Wonderful city. But if you can't wait until next spring to learn more about everything in Microsoft 365, there is the European SharePoint Conference coming up in Prague December 2nd through 5th this fall. There'll be 5 keynotes. That's an entire hand worth of keynotes. Jeff Teeper, Scott Hanselman, Alex Simmons, Miri Rodriguez, and Vesa Juvonen. 4 days of content, over 100 sessions at every possible level. You can learn more at SharePointEurope.com, and it'll be the perfect thing to carry you over into the American football playoff season, because I cannot let an episode go.
What a stretch. I mean, sometimes it's shameful. It is shameful. But we'll let it slide because, well, it's Chris, and he's just a nice guy. But with that, we've come to the end of our episode.
We have.
Thank you to our guests, Richard Toland, John Peluso, and Adam Levithan, and of course, my mom, who to my kids is known as Grandma Mary, and to me, I just call her Ma, and I love her dearly. I want to thank her for all of the years, this year and the previous 47.
And Mary, thank you very much for sharing not only Mark with our listeners, but also your time and your story here today as well. To our listeners, you can check out our show page for links to everything we discussed today and more. Go to aka.ms/theintrozone.
Send us your questions or feedback for the SharePoint engineering team and product teams, or my mom. You can email us at theintrozone@microsoft.com or on Twitter @SharePoint, @mcashman, and @cmcnulty2000.
Tell all your friends and colleagues about the show and share the SharePoint love. Subscribe down at the local bakery where you get your coffee cake or anywhere else that you happen to pick up your podcasts.
Thanks again for listening. We're your hosts, Mark Kashman and Chris McNulty. You've been listening to The Intrazone, a show about the SharePoint Intelligent Intranet.